They say blood is thicker than water, but what they don't tell you is that sometimes the very people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who can destroy you from the inside out. My name is Maya, and for 25 years, I believed I was the problem in my perfect family. It took me breaking completely apart to realize that I wasn't broken at all. I was just trapped in a beautiful cage, painted with smiles and decorated with lies. The Chen family home on Maple Street looked like it belonged in a magazine. White picket fence, manicured lawn, seasonal wreaths that my mother Eleanor changed with religious precision. Neighbors often commented on how lucky I was to have such devoted parents, such a beautiful home, such opportunities. If only they could see what happened when the curtains were drawn. My earliest memory isn't of birthday parties or family vacations. It's of standing in our gleaming kitchen at age 6, watching my mother's face transform from the warm smile she wore for guests into something cold and calculating the moment the front door closed. "Maya, darling," she would say, her voice honey, sweet but her eyes like ice. "You embarrassed Mommy today when you didn't want to hug Mrs. Patterson." Good little girls always do what makes their parents proud. I learned early that my feelings didn't matter. What mattered was the performance, the image, the careful construction of the perfect family that my parents had built their entire identity around. My father Robert was a successful insurance executive who brought home flowers every Friday, not because he was romantic, but because it was part of the script. He would kiss my mother's cheek, ask about her day, and inquire about my grades with the mechanical precision of someone going through the motions. "How's our little scholar?" he would ask, but I could see in his eyes that he was already thinking about his evening news program or the work emails waiting on his phone. I was a checkbox in his daily routine, nothing more. But it was my mother who perfected the art of loving destruction. Eleanor Chen was the type of woman other mothers envied. She volunteered at school, organized charity drives, and always looked impeccable. She had a way of speaking about me that made people think she was the most devoted mother in the world. "Oh, Maya is so sensitive," she would tell her friends with a worried sigh. "I try so hard to help her, but she just takes everything to heart. She's been difficult since she was little. Always crying, always needing attention." I would stand there, 7 or 8 or 9 years old, listening to her describe me like I was a problem to be solved, a burden she carried with saintly patience. And somehow, she made it sound like love. "The doctor says some children are just more challenging," she would continue, her hand resting on my shoulder in what looked like maternal affection but felt like a warning. "But we keep trying. What else can you do? She's our daughter." The crazy thing is, I believed her. When you're a child and the person who feeds you and clothes you, and is supposed to protect you tells you that you're the problem, you accept it as truth. I thought I was defective, too sensitive, too much trouble. The rules of perfection our house had invisible rules that I learned through 1,000 small punishments. Don't cry in front of guests. It makes Mommy look bad. Always say please, and thank you, and as mime. Perfect children have perfect manners. Never disagree with Mommy in public. Save your questions for later, and then prepare to be corrected. Always smile for photos. The family album must tell the right story. Never tell anyone what happens at home. Families keep their business private. The punishment for breaking these rules was never physical violence. My parents were too sophisticated for that. Instead, it was the silent treatment, the disappointed sighs, the way my mother would suddenly become too busy to help with homework or too tired to read a bedtime story. "I don't know what's wrong with you today, Maya," she would say when I failed to meet her impossible standards. "You're just not yourself. Maybe you need some time alone to think about how to be better." And so I would be alone, in my beautiful room with its matching furniture and carefully arranged books, wondering what was wrong with me and how I could fix it. The worst part wasn't the punishment. It was the way my mother could switch back to loving the moment someone was watching. She had perfected the art of public affection, hugging me tight when neighbors were around, bragging about my grades to her friends, posting photos of our family outings on social media with captions like, "My heart," and "So blessed." I learned to smile on cue, to laugh at the right moments, to play the role of the grateful daughter who had everything a child could want. And I was grateful, wasn't I? Look at this beautiful house, these nice clothes, these opportunities for piano lessons and dance classes and summer camps. What right did I have to complain? The golden cage. By the time I was 12, I had become a master performer. I could sense my mother's mood from across the room and adjust my behavior accordingly. I knew which topics were safe and which would earn me that look of disappointment that made my stomach clench with anxiety. I excelled in school, not because I loved learning, but because good grades were the only currency that bought me approval at home. My report cards were displayed on the refrigerator like trophies, evidence of my parents' excellent parenting. Maya is so motivated. My teachers would tell my mother during parent conferences, she's such a pleasure to have in class. What they didn't see was the panic that would consume me when I got a B+ instead of an A, the way I would lie awake at night rehearsing apologies for disappointing my parents, the constant anxiety that hummed beneath my perfect student facade. I made friends, but I never brought them home. Home was for performance, not for genuine connection. I learned to compartmentalize my life, keeping the real Maya hidden away while presenting the version my parents had created. Why don't you have friends over more often? My mother would ask, but I knew it wasn't really a question. It was a criticism wrapped in concern. Are you having trouble making friends? Is there something we should be worried about? The truth was, I was terrified of my friends seeing through the facade. What if they noticed the way my mother's compliments always came with barbs? What if they saw how I tensed up when my father asked about my day? What if they realized that the perfect family on Maple Street was just an elaborate performance? The cracks begin to show. As I moved through high school, maintaining the perfect daughter act became harder. Hormones and teenage emotions made it difficult to keep my feelings neatly contained. I started having what my mother called episodes, moments when the pressure would build up, and I would cry or get angry, or, worst of all, ask why she always seemed disappointed in me. I don't know what's gotten into you lately, she would say, her voice dripping with wounded confusion. I've given you everything, and this is how you repay me. Maybe you need to see someone, maybe there's something wrong that we need to fix. The threat of therapy wasn't about helping me. It was about finding an official diagnosis for why I was so difficult, so ungrateful, so different from the daughter she had planned to have. But something was shifting inside me. Some small voice that had been buried under years of conditioning was starting to whisper that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the problem after all. It started with small observations. The way my friends' parents asked about their feelings without judgment, the way my English teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, would listen to my ideas without immediately correcting or improving them. The way my friend Jessica's mother would apologize when she was wrong about something, without making it a referendum on Jessica's character. I began to wonder if love was supposed to feel so conditional, so fragile, so dependent on perfect behavior. But wondering and knowing are two different things, and I was still years away from understanding the full extent of what had been done to me in the name of love. For now I was just a confused teenager in a beautiful house, playing a role I was starting to forget was just pretend. The perfect daughter, the grateful child, the success story, the girl who was slowly suffocating behind her practiced smile. My freshman roommate was a girl named Sarah from a small town in Wisconsin. She was bubbly and confident in a way that seemed effortless, and she talked about her family like they were actual friends rather than judges she had to perform for. My mom called 3 times today, she said one evening, flopping onto her bed with a grin. She's worried I'm not eating enough vegetables, but also wanted to hear about my sociology professor because she thinks he sounds cute from how I described him. I stared at her confused. She's not angry that you're not eating right? Sarah laughed. Angry? No, she's just being a mom. She worries because she loves me, not because she thinks I'm doing everything wrong. She paused, studying my face. Don't your parents do that too? I didn't know how to answer. When my mother called, which she did every Sunday at exactly 2 p.m., the conversations followed a predictable script. How were my grades? Was I maintaining my scholarships? Had I made any good networking connections? Any missteps were met with gentle disappointment and suggestions for improvement. You sound tired, Maya, she would say if I let even a hint of stress show in my voice. Are you taking care of yourself? You know how you get when you don't manage your time properly. Maybe you should make a schedule. You remember how well that worked in high school. Every conversation left me feeling drained, like I'd failed some test I didn't know I was taking. But living with Sarah, I started to see what unconditional love actually looked like. Her parents sent care packages filled with her favorite snacks, not nutritious foods she should be eating. They asked about her happiness, not just her achievements. When she got a C in calculus, her father called to tell her he was proud of her for trying her best, not to discuss strategies for improvement. My dad said something funny. Sarah told me after that call. He said, Sarah, you're going to have plenty of grades in your life, but you only get one chance to be 18 and figuring yourself out. Don't waste it trying to be perfect. I felt something crack open in my chest when she said that. In my family, being 18 was just another opportunity to excel, another stage where perfection was expected. The friendship that changed everything. It was in my sophomore year that I met Jessica Martinez in my psychology class. She was everything I had been trained not to be. Loud, opinionated, comfortable taking up space. She laughed too loudly, interrupted professors when she disagreed with them, and wore clothes that expressed her personality rather than seeking approval. I was fascinated and terrified by her freedom. "You're so quiet," she said to me after class one day. "Do you actually have opinions about anything we're discussing, or are you just here to take perfect notes?" Something in her directness broke through my careful walls. "I have opinions," I said, surprising myself with the defensiveness in my voice. "Good," she grinned. "Let's hear them." Jessica became my first real friend. Not someone I performed for, but someone who seemed genuinely interested in who I was underneath all my careful training. She challenged everything I'd been taught about how to exist in the world. "Why do you always apologize before you speak?" she asked me one day. "You just said sorry, but I think, why are you sorry for having a thought?" I hadn't even realized I was doing it. The automatic apology for taking up space, for having needs, for existing in a way that might inconvenience others. It was so deeply ingrained that it felt like breathing. "I guess I don't want to seem pushy," I said. "Pushy?" Jessica laughed. "Maya, you're like the opposite of pushy. You're so afraid of taking up space that you've basically made yourself invisible. When's the last time you told someone what you actually wanted instead of just going along with whatever they suggested?" I couldn't remember. Jessica's family was Mexican, American, and they were loud and chaotic in ways that initially overwhelmed me. When I visited her home for Thanksgiving sophomore year, I braced myself for the kind of performance I knew from family gatherings. Everyone on their best behavior, conversations carefully steered away from anything controversial, emotions kept in careful check. Instead, I walked into beautiful chaos. Jessica's little brother was arguing with their father about football. Her grandmother was telling a story that had everyone laughing so hard they were crying. Her mother was simultaneously cooking, mediating a dispute between cousins, and offering opinions about Jessica's new haircut. Maya, Jessica's mother Carmen, swept me into a hug that smelled like cinnamon and garlic. "We've heard so much about you. Are you hungry?" "Of course you're hungry. Sit, eat, tell us everything." They argued about politics at the dinner table. Jessica's uncle told embarrassing stories about her childhood. Her cousin spilled wine on the tablecloth and everyone just laughed and helped clean it up. When Jessica's younger sister started crying about some drama with her friends, the whole table offered advice and comfort without anyone suggesting she was being too sensitive or dramatic. It was messy and imperfect and real, and I felt something I'd never experienced in my own home, the safety to be human. "Your family is so..." I struggled for words as Jessica and I did dishes later. "Loud, chaotic, embarrassing," she supplied with a grin. "Happy," I said quietly. "They're so happy." Jessica paused, studying my face. "Aren't you happy with your family?" It was such a simple question, but it hit me like a physical blow. Was I happy? I was grateful, certainly. I was successful, accomplished, everything my parents had worked to make me. But happy? I don't know, I admitted, and saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff. The cracks widened my junior year. The careful balance I'd maintained between my old self and the person I was becoming started to fracture. I was changing, developing my own opinions, my own interests, my own sense of what I wanted from life. But my parents expected the same dutiful daughter who called every Sunday and came home for holidays with perfect grades and no complaints. The tension came to a head during winter break. I had started seeing a therapist at the campus counseling center. Not because I thought anything was seriously wrong, but because Jessica had suggested it might help me understand why I felt so anxious all the time. Dr. Patricia Wong was a kind woman who asked questions that made me think about things I'd never examined before. "How do you feel when you think about disappointing your parents?" she asked during one session. The question unleashed a flood of anxiety so intense I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Terrified," I whispered, "like the world might end." "And how old do you feel when you have that fear?" 5. I said without thinking, "Like I'm 5 years old and I've done something terrible and I might be abandoned." Dr. Wong nodded gently. "That's a very young fear, Maya. Let's explore where that might come from." Slowly, session by session, I began to understand that the love I'd received wasn't quite as unconditional as I'd believed. It was love with strings attached, love that required me to be a certain way, achieve certain things, never cause too much trouble or need too much attention. When I went home for winter break, armed with this new awareness, everything felt different. The house looked the same, still magazine perfect, still impeccably decorated. But I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before. The way my mother's compliments always came with comparisons. "You look lovely, dear, though maybe we should think about a different style for your hair." The way my father's interest in my life extended only to achievements he could brag about to his colleagues. The way both of them seemed to be waiting for me to say or do something wrong so they could correct it. "You seem different," my mother observed on my second day home. We were sitting in the pristine living room, drinking tea from cups that were never used when guests weren't around. More argumentative. I hadn't argued with anything. I'd simply asked her opinion about something without first agreeing with what I thought she wanted to hear. "I'm not argumentative, Mom. I'm just participating in the conversation." She gave me that look, the one that said I was being difficult, sensitive, problematic. Well, I suppose college teaches you to question everything. Just remember that questioning doesn't always mean you're right, sweetheart. Experience matters. The old me would have apologized, backed down, found a way to smooth over the tension. But something had shifted in me, some small flame of self-respect that Jessica and Sarah and Dr. Wong had helped kindle. "What if I am right, though?" I asked quietly. "What if my opinion is valid even if it's different from yours?" The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face went through several expressions: surprise, hurt, disappointment, and finally, that familiar look of concerned confusion. "Maya, darling, I don't know what they're teaching you at that school, but you're starting to sound very ungrateful. We've given you everything, and now you want to argue with us about what? Whether your opinions matter more than your parents." And there it was. The trap I'd been caught in my entire life. Any assertion of independence was reframed as ingratitude. Any expression of my own thoughts was presented as disrespect. Any sign that I might be developing into my own person was treated as a rejection of their love. For the first time, I saw it clearly. And for the first time, I felt angry. The point of no return the rest of winter break was a masterclass in emotional manipulation that I was finally educated enough to recognize. When direct confrontation didn't work, my mother switched to wounded martyrdom. "I just don't understand where I went wrong," she confided to my father in a voice loud enough for me to overhear. "I've tried so hard to be a good mother, to give her everything she needs. But she's so angry with us, and I don't know why." My father, as always, took his cue from her. "Maybe she's just stressed from school," he said in that dismissive way that made it clear he thought I was overreacting to something trivial. "You know how she gets when she's under pressure." They talked about me like I wasn't there, like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be understood. And when I tried to explain that I wasn't angry, just trying to have an adult relationship with them, I was told I was too sensitive. And reading things into their perfectly reasonable concern. The final straw came when I mentioned, casually, that I'd been talking to someone at the counseling center. My mother's face went white. "You've been in therapy. Without telling us." "It's just the campus counseling center, Mom. Lots of students use it. It's no big deal." "No big deal." She looked genuinely stricken. "Maya, what are you telling these people about us? About our family?" The fear in her voice revealed everything. She wasn't worried about my well-being. She was worried about her image, about what secrets I might be spilling to outsiders, about how it would look if people knew her daughter needed professional help. "I'm not telling them anything about you," I said, though that wasn't entirely true. "I'm talking about myself, my own feelings." "What feelings? What could you possibly need to talk to a stranger about that you can't discuss with your own parents?" How could I explain that the very question she was asking was part of the problem? How could I tell her that I needed someone neutral, someone who didn't have a stake in keeping me small and compliant, someone who could help me figure out who I was underneath all the layers of expectation and conditioning? "Sometimes it helps to have an outside perspective," I said carefully. "An outside perspective." She repeated the words like they tasted bitter. "On your family. On us. On everything we've done for you." And there it was again. Everything twisted back to their sacrifice, their love, their generosity. Any suggestion that I might need something they couldn't provide was treated as a betrayal. That night, lying in my childhood bed, surrounded by the posters and books and awards that belonged to the girl I used to be, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to apologize for growing up. I wasn't going to shrink myself back down to fit into the box they'd built for me. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life performing gratitude for a love that came with so many conditions I could barely breathe under the weight of them. For the first time in my life, I was going to choose myself. I just had no idea how much that choice was going to cost me. It started with the phone calls. Instead of our usual Sunday check-ins, my mother began calling 2, sometimes 3 times a week. But these weren't the structured conversations of the past. They were emotional ambushes designed to pull me back into line. "I've been crying all night," she would say, her voice thick with tears. "I keep wondering where I went wrong as a mother. Your father and I sacrificed so much to give you opportunities, and now you act like we're terrible people." "Mom, I never said you were terrible. You don't have to say it, Maya. It's in your tone, in the way you question everything we say. You used to trust us, used to value our wisdom. Now you act like we're the enemy." The conversations would go in circles, with me trying to explain that I wasn't rejecting them, just trying to have my own thoughts and feelings, while she painted my growing independence as a personal attack on everything she'd ever done for me. "I talked to Mrs. Patterson yesterday," she said during one particularly brutal call. "She asked about you, and I didn't know what to say. How do I explain that my daughter thinks she knows better than the parents who raised her? How do I tell our friends that you're in therapy, talking to strangers about private family matters?" The shame was immediate and crushing. I could picture Mrs. Patterson's concerned face, the whispered conversations among the neighbors about the Chen family's troubled daughter. In my mother's world, seeking help was a public admission of failure, not just mine but hers. "Maybe I should transfer," I said during one session with Dr. Wang. "Come home, go to a local college. I feel like I'm destroying my family by being here." Dr. Wang leaned forward slightly. "Maya, can you hear what you just said? You're talking about giving up your education, your growth, your independence. Not because it's what you want, but because your family is uncomfortable with who you're becoming. But they love me. They just want what's best for me. What does what's best for you look like in their eyes?" I thought about it. Someone who doesn't question them. Someone who's grateful and successful but not too independent. Someone who makes them look good as parents. And what does what's best for you look like in your eyes? The question hung in the air. I realized I'd spent so little time thinking about what I actually wanted that I barely knew how to answer. The financial pressure, when emotional manipulation didn't bring me back into line. My parents escalated to financial pressure. I had always known they paid for most of my college expenses, but I'd never realized how much they saw that support as a form of control. "We need to talk about your expenses," my father said during a rare phone call. Usually, he left the emotional heavy lifting to my mother, but apparently this required his business-like authority. "Your mother and I have been reviewing your college costs, and frankly, we're concerned about the return on our investment." Return on investment. Like I was a stock portfolio instead of their daughter. "Your grades are still good," he continued, "but we're hearing reports about your attitude, your questioning of authority. That's not the kind of character we thought we were paying to develop." The threat was clear without being explicitly stated. "Fall back in line, or lose financial support." I felt the familiar panic rising in my chest, that childhood terror of being abandoned, left to fend for myself. But alongside the fear was something new: anger. "Are you saying you'll stop paying for college if I don't become the person you want me to be?" I asked. "We're saying we need to see that our investment is creating the kind of young woman we can be proud of." My father replied smoothly. "Someone who respects her parents, who understands the value of family, who doesn't air our private business to strangers." The therapy. It always came back to the therapy. That night, I called Jessica in tears. "They're going to cut me off," I sobbed. "I can't afford this school without their help, and they know it." "Okay," Jessica said calmly. "So what are your options? Go home. Transfer to a local school, stop therapy, become who they want me to be, and give up who you're becoming." I cried harder because she was right. Over the past year, I had started to discover pieces of myself I never knew existed. I had opinions about books and politics and social issues. I laughed louder, spoke up in class, stayed up late having the kind of deep conversations with friends that my parents would have dismissed as too intense or overthinking things. I was becoming real, and the cost of that reality was apparently my family's love and support. The isolation tactic. When guilt and financial pressure didn't work, my parents tried a different approach. They began systematically isolating me from my support system. "We'd like to meet these friends of yours," my mother announced during spring break. "Especially this Jessica you mentioned so much. And your roommate Sarah. We should have them over for dinner." I knew it was a trap, but I couldn't figure out how to avoid it without seeming unreasonable. So I invited Jessica home for a weekend, hoping that maybe, somehow, my parents would see what I saw in her warmth, her authenticity, her genuine care for me. Instead, they dissected her like a specimen. "She's very opinionated," my mother said after Jessica left, and loud. "I'm not sure she's the best influence on you, sweetheart." "What do you mean?" "Well, she has very strong views about things she probably doesn't fully understand yet, and she seems to encourage you to question everything, to think you know better than people with more experience." My mother's voice was gentle, concerned. "I just worry that she's filling your head with ideas that aren't helpful." My father nodded. "She seems like the type who thinks challenging authority is the same thing as being intelligent. That's not real wisdom, Maya. Real wisdom is knowing when to listen to people who've been where you are." They weren't wrong that Jessica was opinionated and challenging. But what they saw as negative traits, I saw as her strength. She had taught me that I was allowed to disagree, allowed to question, allowed to take up space in the world. "I like that she's strong," I said carefully. "She's helped me find my voice." "But what kind of voice?" my mother asked. "A voice that argues with your parents. A voice that makes you unhappy with everything you've been given." "That doesn't sound like finding yourself, Maya. That sounds like losing yourself." The gaslighting was so subtle, so wrapped in concern that for a moment I doubted myself. Was Jessica a bad influence? Was I becoming someone unpleasant, ungrateful, difficult? Then I remembered Jessica's family dinner, the warmth and acceptance, the way they celebrated each other's differences instead of trying to smooth them away. I remembered the way Jessica had looked at me when I told her about my parents' criticism. "Maya," she had said, "families that love you don't try to talk you out of having friends who make you happy. They don't try to convince you that the people who help you grow are bad for you. That's not love, that's control." The breaking point, the final confrontation, came in April of my junior year. I had been accepted into a summer research program in psychology. A huge opportunity that would help me get into graduate school, and was exactly the kind of achievement my parents usually celebrated. But when I called to tell them the news, the response wasn't what I expected. "Psychology," my mother said flatly. "So you want to spend the summer studying how to analyze people's problems?" "It's research, Mom, about resilience and recovery. It's fascinating work, and it looks great on graduate school applications." "Graduate school for what exactly?" "To become a therapist like the one who's been filling your head with ideas about how terrible your family is." The accusation hung in the air like a poison cloud. "Dr. Wong isn't filling my head with anything," I said. "She's helping me understand my own thoughts and feelings." "Your thoughts and feelings," my father interjected, "have been pretty consistently negative about your family lately. Maybe the question isn't what we're doing wrong. Maybe it's what this therapist is encouraging you to see problems where they don't exist." "She's not encouraging me to see problems." "Maya." My mother's voice had that tone I remembered from childhood, the one that meant I was about to be corrected. "Listen to yourself. You're defending a stranger over your own parents. You're choosing her perspective over ours. Doesn't that tell you something?" It did tell me something, but not what they wanted it to tell me. "I'm not choosing anyone over anyone," I said, feeling my voice shake. "I'm trying to figure out who I am, what I want from my life." "That's not a betrayal of you. That's growing up. Growing up is learning wisdom from people who love you," my father said, "not rejecting everything you've been taught because some therapist convinced you that you're a victim." Victim. The word hit me like a slap. "I never said I was a victim." "You didn't have to say it," my mother replied. "It's in every conversation we have now. Poor Maya, whose parents expected too much. Poor Maya, who had to live up to standards. Poor Maya, who was loved so much that she feels suffocated." Her voice was dripping with sarcasm and hurt, and I felt the familiar urge to apologize, to take it all back, to fix whatever I had broken. But then I remembered something Dr. Wong had asked me. When someone tries to make you feel guilty for having needs or boundaries, who benefits from that guilt? "I'm not coming home this summer," I said quietly. "I'm doing the research program." The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Finally, my mother spoke, and her voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. "I see. Well, I suppose we know where your priorities are now. This isn't about priorities. It's exactly about priorities, Maya. You're prioritizing strangers over family, your own selfish interests over the people who sacrificed everything for you. That's fine. That's your choice. Just don't expect us to pretend we're not hurt by it." The call ended with my mother hanging up on me for the first time in my life. I sat in my dorm room, staring at the phone, feeling like I'd just survived a natural disaster. My chest was tight with anxiety and grief, but underneath it all was something I'd never felt before: relief. I had chosen myself, and I was still breathing. For the first time in my life, I had set a boundary and held it, even when the people I loved most tried to tear it down. It was terrifying and exhilarating and heartbreaking all at once. But I was still here. I was still me, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The aftermath, the weeks that followed, were some of the darkest of my life. My parents didn't call, didn't email, didn't respond to my attempts to reach out. The silent treatment, their oldest and most effective punishment, was being deployed with precision. I found myself checking my phone constantly, hoping for a message that never came. I wrote emails I didn't send, rehearsed apologies for crimes I wasn't sure I'd committed. The part of me that had been trained to seek their approval was in full panic mode. But I also started to notice things. Without their constant input, criticism, and concern, I felt lighter somehow. My anxiety decreased, I slept better, I laughed more with my friends. "You seem different," Sarah observed one evening as we studied together. "More present, I guess. Like you're actually here, instead of thinking about what someone else would think about you being here." She was right. Without my parents' voices in my head, constantly evaluating my choices, I was starting to experience life more directly. Food tasted better when I wasn't worried about whether I was eating the right things. Conversations were more enjoyable when I wasn't monitoring myself for signs of being too sensitive or too much. I was learning what it felt like to exist without an audience, to make choices based on what I wanted rather than what would earn approval. It was the scariest and most wonderful feeling I'd ever experienced. Dr. Wang helped me understand what was happening. "You're differentiating," she explained. "Learning to be your own person instead of an extension of your parents' expectations. It's a normal, healthy part of development that some families make very difficult." "But I feel so guilty," I admitted. "Like I'm being selfish, ungrateful." "Maya, can you think of a single thing you've asked for that was unreasonable? The right to have your own opinions. The right to choose your own friends. The right to make decisions about your education and career. These aren't selfish demands. They're basic human needs." She was right, but knowing it intellectually didn't make the guilt disappear. I had been programmed from birth to see my independence as a betrayal, my growth as ingratitude, my authenticity as a problem to be solved. Unlearning that programming was going to take time. But for the first time in my life, I had time. No one was rushing me to be grateful, to be perfect, to be anything other than exactly who I was in that moment. And who I was, it turned out, was someone worth fighting for. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the lead researcher on our team, was studying intergenerational trauma and family systems. Our project focused on how emotional patterns get passed down through families, creating cycles of dysfunction that can persist for generations. "Maya," Dr. Martinez said during our first team meeting, "I understand you're interested in family dynamics. What draws you to this field?" I felt the familiar urge to give the safe, acceptable answer. Something about wanting to help people, about finding psychology fascinating in a general way. But something about Dr. Martinez's direct, genuine curiosity made me want to be honest. "I think I grew up in a family system that looked healthy from the outside but was complicated on the inside," I said carefully. "I'm trying to understand how that works, how patterns get established and maintained." She nodded, unsurprised. "Many of us are drawn to study the things we've experienced. It's one way of healing, understanding the mechanics of what happened to us." Over the next few weeks, I dove into research that felt like reading my own story written in academic language. Studies on emotional parentification. When children become responsible for managing their parents' emotional needs. Research on conditional love and its impact on self-worth. Papers on how families maintain homeostasis by resisting any member's attempts to change or grow. I learned about something called differentiation of self. The process of becoming your own person while still maintaining connection to your family. I discovered that what I'd been calling selfishness was actually a healthy developmental milestone that some families fight against with everything they have. "Look at this," I said to my research partner, Kevin, showing him a paper on family scapegoating. "It says here that families sometimes choose one member to be the problem, because it keeps the focus off the real issues in the family system." Kevin, a graduate student who'd grown up in foster care, nodded knowingly. "Makes sense. If everyone's focused on fixing the identified patient, no one has to look at why the family needs a patient in the first place." The identified patient. That phrase hit me like a lightning bolt. I thought about all the times my mother had worried about my sensitivity, my difficulties, my need for therapy. How she'd made my struggles the central family drama, while never examining why I might be struggling in the first place. I wasn't just the difficult daughter. I was the family's designated problem, the one whose issues kept everyone else from having to examine their own. The mentor I never knew I needed, Dr. Martinez, became more than a research supervisor. She became the first adult who seemed genuinely interested in helping me develop my own thinking rather than molding me into someone else's idea of who I should be. "You have good instincts for this work," she told me one afternoon as we reviewed data, "but I notice you always look to me for confirmation before trusting your own observations. What do you think that's about?" I blushed, embarrassed to have been so transparent. I guess I'm not used to trusting my own judgment. I've always been told that I overthink things, that I'm too sensitive to see situations clearly. Who told you that? The question was asked so matter-of-factly that I answered without thinking. My parents. My mother, especially. She says I read too much into things, that I create problems where they don't exist. Daughter. Martinez was quiet for a long moment. "Maya, in the 3 weeks we've been working together, I've watched you analyze complex family dynamics with remarkable insight. You see patterns that other students miss. You ask questions that get to the heart of issues. That doesn't sound like someone who creates problems where they don't exist." Her words felt like cool water on a burn I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there. But what if I am too sensitive? What if I do overthink things? Even if that were true, and I'm not saying it is, sensitivity and deep thinking aren't character flaws. They're assets, especially in this field. The question is, who benefits from convincing you that your perceptions are wrong? I knew the answer, but I wasn't ready to say it out loud. Dr. Martinez continued, "I've noticed that students who've grown up in chaotic or controlling families often come to graduate school thinking their insights are wrong, their feelings invalid. It's a form of learned helplessness that serves the family system but doesn't serve the individual." That evening, I called Jessica, who was spending the summer interning at a nonprofit in Chicago. "I think my mom has been gaslighting me my entire life," I said without preamble. "Congratulations," Jessica said dryly. "You're officially catching up to what the rest of us figured out sophomore year. You knew. Maya, honey, the way you apologized for having opinions, the way you second-guessed every feeling you had, the way you talked about your parents like they were these perfect people who just happened to make you feel like shit about yourself. Of course we knew something was off." I felt a mix of embarrassment and relief. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you weren't ready to hear it. People have to come to these realizations in their own time, or they just get defensive and push away the people trying to help them." Jessica was right. If she'd told me a year ago that my parents were manipulative, I would have defended them and probably distanced myself from her. I had to discover the truth for myself, in my own way, when I was strong enough to handle it. The summer of self-discovery without my parents' constant input, I started discovering who I actually was underneath all the conditioning. I learned that I was naturally curious about people's inner lives, drawn to understanding how minds work and hearts heal. I discovered that I was funny, not the polite, appropriate humor I'd been raised with, but genuinely witty in ways that made my research team laugh. I found out that I loved spicy food, blues music, and staying up late having deep conversations about philosophy and psychology. I learned that I was actually quite good at setting boundaries with people who weren't my parents, and that most healthy people respected those boundaries instead of seeing them as personal attacks. "You're blossoming, Dr. Martinez observed one day as we walked across campus after a particularly successful research presentation. "When you first started, you seemed like you were constantly bracing for criticism. Now you engage with ideas like someone who expects to be heard." She was right. I had started speaking up in meetings, asking questions without apologizing first, even disagreeing with established theories when my observations suggested different conclusions. The old Maya would have been terrified of seeming presumptuous or disrespectful. "I think I'm learning what it feels like to have my thoughts taken seriously," I said. "That's something everyone deserves from childhood," Dr. Martinez replied. "But it's never too late to start." The letter that changed nothing and everything. Near the end of the summer, I finally heard from my mother. Not a phone call, that would have required actual conversation, but a carefully crafted letter that arrived in my campus mailbox like a guided missile aimed at my newfound confidence. "Dearest Maya, your father and I have been doing a lot of soul searching these past few months, trying to understand where we went wrong in raising you. We've concluded that perhaps we loved you too much, gave you too much, expected too little. We created a daughter who believes she's entitled to hurt the people who sacrificed everything for her happiness. We've spoken to several people about your behavior. Friends, family members, even Dr. Kim from church, who has a psychology degree. Everyone agrees that you're going through a phase that many young people experience, where they need to reject their families in order to feel independent. We understand this is normal, and we're trying to be patient. However, we can't continue to fund education that seems designed to teach you that your parents are your enemies. If you choose to continue in psychology, you'll need to find your own way financially. We're willing to support a more practical major, business, perhaps, or education, something that will prepare you for a stable future, rather than teaching you to analyze and criticize everything you've been given. We love you, Maya, but love isn't unlimited patience for ingratitude. We hope you'll come to your senses before you damage our relationship beyond repair. With concerned love, Mom and Dad. I read the letter 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of manipulation. The way they framed their control as love. The way they positioned my growth as ingratitude. The way they threatened financial support while claiming it was for my own good. The way they recruited outside voices to validate their perspective while dismissing the professionals who were actually helping me heal. But the most revealing part was what they didn't say. Not once did they ask how I was feeling, what I was learning, what I needed from them. Not once did they express genuine curiosity about who I was becoming or what mattered to me. The entire letter was about their feelings, their disappointment, their needs. For the first time, I could see it clearly. This wasn't a relationship. It was a performance contract where I played the role of grateful daughter, and they played loving parents, and any deviation from the script was treated as a breach of contract. I took the letter to Dr. Martinez. "What do you see when you read this?" she asked after I'd shown it to her. "A family system trying to pull me back into dysfunction," I said, surprising myself with the clarity of my response. "They're using guilt, financial pressure, and social validation to try to convince me that growth equals betrayal. And how do you feel about that?" I expected to feel guilty, torn, conflicted. Instead, I felt something I'd never experienced before: clarity. "I feel sad for them," I said slowly. "And I feel sorry for the little girl I used to be, who believed this was love. But I don't feel guilty anymore. I can't go back to being someone I never actually was." Dr. Martinez smiled. "That sounds like the voice of someone who knows herself." The decision that set me free. I wrote my parents back, but not the letter they expected. "Dear Mom and Dad, thank you for your letter. It helped me understand some things I'd been struggling with. I've decided to take out student loans to finish my degree in psychology. Not because I want to hurt you, but because I've found my calling, and I won't give up who I'm meant to be to maintain who you want me to be. I love you both, but I'm learning that love doesn't mean agreeing with everything someone says or becoming the person they want you to be. Real love means accepting someone as they are, supporting their growth even when it's different from what you planned. I hope someday we can have a relationship based on mutual respect rather than my performance of gratitude. Until then, I need space to become the person I'm meant to be. I'll be in touch when I'm ready." I sent the letter before I could second-guess myself, then sat in my dorm room feeling like I'd just jumped off a cliff without a parachute. But I wasn't falling. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was flying. The support that saved me. The aftermath of that letter could have destroyed me if I hadn't had the right support system. My parents responded with a campaign of flying monkeys, relatives and family friends, who called to tell me how much I was hurting my poor parents, how ungrateful I was being, how I'd regret this decision someday. "Your cousin Lisa called," Sarah told me one evening. "She wanted to talk to you about being more understanding of your parents' position. I told her you weren't available." Jessica drove up from Chicago the weekend the financial pressure hit hardest. I'd been staring at loan applications, wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life, when she appeared at my door with takeout and wine. "You're spiraling," she announced, setting up camp in my room. "Tell me what's going on." I explained about the loans, the family pressure, the fear that maybe I was being selfish and ungrateful. "Maya," Jessica said when I finished, "let me ask you something. If your best friend came to you and said her parents would only pay for college if she gave up her dreams and major in something that would make them happy, what would you tell her?" "I'd tell her that's not how love works, right? And if she said her parents cut off all contact because she wanted to make her own decisions about her life, I'd tell her that's emotional abuse. And if she said maybe she should just give in, become who they want her to be, because it's easier than fighting, I was quiet for a long moment. I'd tell her that living someone else's life isn't really living at all. Jessica nodded. So why are you holding yourself to a different standard than you'd hold anyone else you care about? That night, surrounded by my chosen family, Jessica, Sarah, Kevin from my research team, even Dr. Martinez, who'd become more mentor than supervisor, I finally understood what unconditional love actually looked like. It looked like people who celebrated my growth instead of feeling threatened by it. It looked like support that didn't come with strings attached. It looked like relationships where I could be fully myself without fear of abandonment. It looked nothing like what I'd grown up thinking was love. And for the first time in my life, I knew I deserved better. I met Marcus Washington in the most ordinary way possible. In the campus coffee shop, fighting over the last psychology journal in the periodicals section. He was a graduate student in social work, writing his thesis on trauma-informed care for foster children who aged out of the system. You can have it, I said, already stepping back in the automatic deference that had become second nature. I can find what I need online. He looked at me with curious brown eyes, tilting his head slightly. Or we could share it. What are you looking for? Something in his tone, genuinely collaborative rather than competitive, made me pause. Research on family systems theory. I'm working on my senior thesis. Perfect. I'm looking at attachment theory and how early family dynamics affect adult relationships. Sounds like we're in complementary territory. We ended up spending 3 hours in that coffee shop, sharing the journal and diving into a discussion about psychology that felt more like a conversation between equals than anything I'd experienced in my family. Marcus listened to my ideas without trying to improve them, asked questions that built on my thoughts rather than challenging them, and shared his own insights without needing to prove he was smarter than me. You have a really interesting perspective on emotional parentification, he said as we finally packed up to leave. I'd love to hear more about your research sometime. It was such a simple invitation, but it hit me like a revelation. He wanted to hear more about my thoughts, not because he was trying to fix me or grade me or mold me into something better, but because he found my mind genuinely interesting. I hadn't realized that was possible. Learning what healthy looks like Marcus and I became study partners, then friends, then something more complicated that neither of us rushed to define. He had grown up in foster care, aging out of the system at 18 with nothing but his own determination and a social worker who'd believed in him. His perspective on family was completely different from mine. Where I'd been trapped by too much control, he'd been abandoned by too little care. The weird thing is, he said one evening as we walked across campus after a study session, I used to envy kids like you, the ones with parents who cared about every detail of their lives, who had expectations and standards and all that structure. Trust me, I said, the grass isn't greener. I'm starting to see that. There's caring about someone and then there's, what would you call it? Ownership, I said without hesitation. My parents didn't love me, they owned me. There's a difference. Marcus stopped walking and looked at me seriously. That's a hell of a thing to realize about your own family. The hell of a thing is that it took me 21 years to realize it. What struck me about Marcus wasn't just his insight. It was his emotional availability. When I told him about my family dynamics, he didn't try to fix me or offer solutions or suggest that maybe I was being too harsh. He just listened, reflected back what he heard, and validated my experience without making it about him. That sounds incredibly lonely, he said when I finished describing my childhood. To have parents who loved their idea of you, but never tried to know who you actually were. It was the first time anyone had identified the loneliness at the heart of my experience. I'd focused so much on the control, the manipulation, the performance pressure, but underneath it all was the devastating isolation of never being truly seen. It was lonely, I admitted, feeling tears threaten. I spent my whole childhood trying to become someone they could love, and I never realized that real love doesn't require you to become someone else. Marcus reached over and took my hand. Not to fix my sadness or distract me from it, but just to let me know I wasn't alone with it. That simple gesture taught me more about love than 21 years with my parents had. The relationship that taught me about boundaries dating Marcus was like learning a foreign language. The language of mutual respect, healthy boundaries, and interdependence without enmeshment. Everything I'd learned about relationships from my family had to be unlearned and rebuilt from the ground up. You don't have to agree with everything I say, you know, He told me one evening after I'd automatically deferred to his opinion about a movie we'd watched. "I know that," I said, but I could hear the uncertainty in my own voice. "Do you? Because you've agreed with literally every opinion I've expressed tonight. Either I'm incredibly wise, or you're not being honest about your own thoughts." The old me would have been defensive, would have insisted I genuinely agreed with him, would have made his observation into evidence of my failure as a girlfriend. But months of therapy and Marcus's gentle consistency had created enough safety for me to be honest. "I guess I'm still learning that disagreement doesn't equal conflict," I admitted. "In my family, if you disagreed with someone, it meant you were being difficult or disrespectful. It was easier to just not have opinions." "That sounds exhausting," Marcus said. "Always monitoring yourself, never getting to be genuine." It was. But it was also safe. If I didn't have opinions, I couldn't have the wrong opinions. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What did you actually think about the movie?" It was such a simple question, but it required me to dig past years of conditioning to find my authentic response. "I thought it was pretentious," I said hesitantly. "Like the director was more interested in showing off than telling a story. The characters felt like symbols instead of people." Marcus grinned. "See, that's way more interesting than yeah, it was good. I actually agree with you. I was just curious if you'd tell me what you really thought." "You were testing me." "Not testing, inviting. There's a difference." And there was. Marcus had a way of creating space for my authentic self without demanding performance or punishing honesty. When I was anxious, he didn't try to fix my anxiety or tell me I shouldn't feel that way. He just sat with me and let me feel what I was feeling. When I was angry about something, he didn't take it personally or try to talk me out of it. He listened and tried to understand. It was revolutionary. The challenge that tested everything, the real test of our relationship, came in the spring, when I was applying to graduate programs in clinical psychology. I'd been accepted to several excellent schools, but my top choice was a program in Seattle, 3,000 miles from everything I'd ever known. "I'm scared," I admitted to Marcus one evening as we sat in his apartment, acceptance letters spread across his coffee table. "Off what?" "Off going so far away. Of being completely on my own. I struggled to find the words. Off being happy without feeling guilty about it." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "The guilt makes sense. You've been programmed to believe that choosing yourself is selfish. But Maya, look at what you've accomplished this year. You've broken free from a toxic family system, figured out what you're passionate about, built healthy relationships, gotten into top graduate programs, and you did it all without hurting anyone. That's not selfish. That's inspirational. But what about us?" I asked quietly. It was the question we'd both been avoiding. Marcus still had 2 years left in his program, and long-distance relationships were complicated under the best circumstances. "What about us?" he asked gently. "I don't want to lose you. You're the first person who's ever loved me without trying to change me." "Maya." Marcus took my hands and looked directly into my eyes. "I love you enough to want you to choose the life that will make you happiest, even if that makes things harder for us. That's what real love does. It supports the other person's growth, even when it's inconvenient." I started crying then, not from sadness but from the overwhelming relief of being with someone who saw my success as something to celebrate rather than something that threatened him. "Besides," he added with a smile, "I've been thinking about transferring to UW for my PhD. Seattle's got some great programs in social work, and I hear the coffee's decent. You'd do that. I'd consider it. Not for you, but for us. There's a difference. That difference between someone rearranging their life to accommodate yours and someone choosing to build a life that includes you, was something I was still learning to recognize. Marcus wasn't offering to sacrifice his dreams for mine. He was exploring how our dreams might align. It was the healthiest thing I'd ever heard. The family that chose me back as graduation approached, I realized I'd built something my parents had never given me: a chosen family. Dr. Martinez had become a mentor and friend who continued to support my academic growth. Jessica and Sarah were the sisters I'd never had, celebrating my successes without jealousy, and supporting me through struggles without judgment. Kevin from my research team had become a close friend who understood the particular pain of growing up in a dysfunctional family system. Even Marcus's foster family, a couple who'd taken him in during high school and maintained a relationship with him into adulthood, had welcomed me with the kind of warmth I'd never experienced from my own relatives. "You know what I love about this family," Jessica said during my graduation party, gesturing around the room filled with the people who'd supported me through my transformation. Nobody here loves you because they have to. We all choose to be here because you're worth choosing. She was right. Every person in that room had seen me at my most vulnerable, most confused, most authentic, and had decided I was worth sticking around for. They'd watch me grow and change and find my voice, and instead of feeling threatened by my evolution, they'd celebrated it. That's when I finally understood what unconditional love actually meant. It didn't mean accepting bad behavior or never having boundaries. It meant loving someone's essential self while supporting their growth into who they were meant to become. It meant what I'd never received from my parents, and what I was finally learning to give and receive in my chosen relationships. The grandmother's journal 2 weeks before graduation, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I drove home, not to reconcile with my parents, but to collect something that belonged to me. I waited until I knew they'd be at work, used my key for what I knew would be the last time, and went straight to the attic. There, in a box of my grandmother's belongings that I'd been given after her death, but had never examined, I found something that changed everything. My grandmother's journal, covering the last 5 years of her life. I sat in that dusty attic, reading page after page of my grandmother's careful handwriting, and discovered the truth about my family's patterns. Eleanor expects perfection from Maya the same way my mother expected it from me, she'd written. The child is so anxious, always trying to please, never feeling good enough. I see myself at that age, desperate for love that came with so many conditions. I want to tell Maya that she's perfect exactly as she is, but Eleanor gets so defensive when anyone suggests her parenting might be less than ideal. The control, the criticism disguised as concern. I lived it, I survived it, but I never broke the cycle. I married a man just like my father, raised a daughter who learned to do the same. I pray Maya will be the one to break free. She has a light in her that reminds me of who I was before I learned to dim myself to keep the peace. Page after page revealed the truth. This wasn't about me being difficult or ungrateful. This was about generational patterns of control and conditional love that had been passed down like a toxic inheritance. But the most powerful entry was from just before my grandmother died. I've been thinking about legacy lately. What do we pass down to the children we love? I pass down fear disguised as caution, control disguised as care, conditions disguised as love. Eleanor is doing the same with Maya. But maybe that's not how legacy has to work. Maybe the most loving thing we can do is break the patterns that wounded us, even if it means disappointing the people who passed those patterns to us. If I could tell Maya one thing, it would be this: you are not responsible for healing your parents' wounds by sacrificing your own wholeness. You are not required to stay small so others can feel big. You are allowed to choose love that doesn't hurt. Choose better, sweet girl. Choose yourself. Choose freedom. Choose the love that sets you free instead of the love that chains you down. I sat in that attic, crying for my grandmother, for the little girl I'd been, for the woman I was becoming, and for the cycle that was finally going to end with me. When I left that house for the last time, I took only the journal. Everything else, the awards and trophies and photos of the perfect daughter I'd once pretended to be, belonged to someone I used to be. The woman I was becoming didn't need those props anymore. She was enough, exactly as she was. The University of Washington's clinical psychology program was intense in ways I hadn't expected. Not just academically, though the coursework was demanding, but emotionally. Every class seemed to touch on some aspect of family dynamics, trauma, or human resilience that connected to my own story. You seem to have particular insight into family systems work, Dr. Sarah Coleman, my advisor, observed after a class discussion on emotional abuse. Have you considered specializing in family therapy? I had, but something held me back. I worry that I might be too invested, too close to the material. Dr. Coleman smiled knowingly. Maya, some of the best therapists are wounded healers, people who've done their own work and can use their experience to help others. The key is making sure you've processed your own trauma enough that you can hold space for others without getting triggered. She was right. I was still in therapy myself, working with Dr. Janet Torres, a wonderful therapist who specialized in helping adult children of dysfunctional families. But I'd come far enough in my own healing to recognize the patterns when I saw them in others. During my first year, I volunteered at a local women's shelter, co-facilitating support groups for women leaving abusive relationships. What struck me was how many of the women described family dynamics that sounded familiar. The gaslighting, the conditional love, the way their sense of reality had been systematically undermined. My husband always said he was just trying to help me be better. One woman, Linda, shared during group. He'd criticize my cooking, my clothes, the way I talked to the kids, but he'd say it was because he loved me and wanted me to succeed. I felt that familiar flutter of recognition. How did that feel, hearing that your husband was helping you? Terrible, Linda said immediately. Like I could never do anything right, like I was this broken person who needed constant fixing. Other women in the group nodded knowingly. They understood the particular pain of love that felt like an improvement project. The thing is, I said carefully, real love doesn't require you to become a different person to deserve it. Love that comes with constant criticism isn't really love, it's control. After the group, Linda approached me. You get it, she said simply. A lot of people try to help, but they don't really understand what it feels like to have someone convince you that their criticism is love. Unfortunately, I do understand, I admitted. How did you get free? The question hit me with unexpected force. How had I gotten free? It hadn't been one dramatic moment but a series of small awakenings, painful choices, and the slow, difficult work of rebuilding my sense of self. Therapy helped, I said. But mostly it was learning to trust my own perceptions, even when other people told me I was wrong, and finding people who loved me without trying to change me. Linda nodded thoughtfully. I'm working on the trusting myself part. It's harder than I expected. After she left, I sat in the empty community room thinking about her question. How had I gotten free? And more importantly, how could I help others find their own path to freedom? Marcus's arrival and new challenges. True to his word, Marcus transferred to UW for his PhD in social work. Having him in Seattle transformed my experience from solitary healing to shared growth, but it also brought new challenges as we navigated building a life together, while both of us continued working through our own family of origin issues. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, I admitted to him one evening as we cooked dinner in the small apartment we'd decided to share. For you to get tired of my baggage, or decide I'm too much work, or find someone less complicated. Marcus stopped chopping vegetables and looked at me seriously. Maya, we've been together for almost 2 years. In that time, have I ever made you feel like you're too much work? I thought about it honestly. No, but that doesn't mean you won't. Okay, but that's anxiety talking, not reality. What does the evidence tell you about how I feel about your baggage? This was something we'd both learned in our respective therapy journeys. To check our fears against actual evidence, rather than letting past wounds dictate present reality. The evidence says you've been consistently supportive, even when I'm struggling, I said reluctantly. You've never used my vulnerabilities against me or made me feel bad for having feelings. Right. So what would it look like to trust the evidence instead of the fear? It was a good question, and one that took me months to answer. Learning to trust love when you've been conditioned to expect conditions is like learning to swim after nearly drowning. Every instinct screams that the water is dangerous, even when you can see it's safe. But Marcus was patient with my learning process, and I was learning to be patient with his. His abandonment wounds meant he sometimes struggled with my need for independence, just as my enmeshment wounds sometimes triggered his fears of being left behind. We're both learning how to do this. Dr. Torres reminded me during a session. Healthy love isn't intuitive for people who grew up with unhealthy models. But the fact that you're both committed to learning, both willing to do your own work, that's what makes it possible. The unexpected contact. I'd been in Seattle for 18 months when my phone rang with a number I recognized but hadn't seen in over 2 years. My mother. I stared at the phone, feeling my heart rate spike, all the old anxiety flooding back in an instant. Part of me wanted to answer, desperate to hear that familiar voice. Part of me wanted to throw the phone across the room. I let it go to voicemail. The message was classic Eleanor Chen. Carefully crafted to sound loving while being subtly manipulative. Maya, sweetheart, it's Mom. I know it's been a long time, and I hope you're doing well. I've been thinking about you so much, especially since I heard from Jessica's mother that you're in graduate school. I'm so proud of you, honey. I always knew you'd do great things. I want you to know that your father and I have been doing a lot of soul searching about our relationship with you. We've even gone to a few counseling sessions to try to understand where things went wrong. We love you so much, Maya, and we miss you terribly. We'd love to talk when you're ready. You'll always be our daughter, no matter what. I listened to the message 3 times, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Part of me was touched that they'd gone to counseling, that they seemed to be acknowledging that something had gone wrong. But part of me noticed what was missing from the message, any actual acknowledgement of what they'd done, any real apology, any indication that they understood why I'd needed space. I've been thinking about you, and "we miss you" weren't the same as "we understand that we hurt you." And we're sorry for the ways we controlled and manipulated you. I called Jessica first. They reached out to my mom asking for your number, she confirmed. My mom told them she didn't have it. Which is true, she doesn't have your Seattle number, but she said they seemed genuinely upset about losing contact with you. Did she say anything else? Jessica was quiet for a moment. She said your mom seemed different. More fragile maybe. Like she'd been crying a lot. But Maya, you know how good your mom is at performing emotion to get what she wants. She was right. My mother had always been skilled at using her own pain as a weapon, making others feel responsible for her emotional state. I talked it over with Dr. Torres during my next session. What do you notice about your body when you think about calling her back, she asked. I did a quick internal scan. Anxiety. Tightness in my chest, that familiar feeling of bracing for impact. And what do you notice when you imagine not calling her back? I considered it. Relief, sadness, but also peace. Your body is giving you information about what feels safe and what doesn't. After 2 years of low contact, how do you feel about potentially opening that door again? The answer surprised me with its clarity. I don't think I'm ready, and I don't think they're ready either. That message was still about their needs, their feelings, their pain. There was no acknowledgement of why I needed space in the first place. Dr. Torres nodded. What would you need to see or hear from them to feel like reconnecting might be safe? Real accountability. Not just we went to counseling, but actual understanding of the impact their behavior had on me. An apology that doesn't center their pain or make me responsible for fixing their hurt feelings. Those sound like reasonable requirements for rebuilding a relationship that's been damaged. I decided not to call back immediately, but I did write a letter. Not to send, just to clarify my own thoughts. Mom and Dad, I got your message. I'm glad to hear you're doing well and that you've been to counseling. I hope it's helpful for you. I'm not ready to resume regular contact yet. The relationship we had before was painful for me, and I need to see evidence of real change before I can feel safe opening that door again. If you're serious about understanding what went wrong and rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms, I'd suggest continuing with counseling, maybe with a therapist who specializes in family systems. When and if you're ready to have conversations about the specific ways our dynamic was harmful to me, I'll be more open to reconnecting. Until then, I need to continue focusing on my own growth and healing. Maya, I never sent the letter, but writing it helped me clarify my boundaries and my bottom line. They would need to do significant work on themselves before I could consider letting them back into my life. Finding my calling my second year in the program, I began seeing clients at the university's training clinic. My first client was a young woman named Amanda, who reminded me so much of my younger self that I had to work hard not to see myself in her story. Amanda was 23, successful in school and work, but struggling with anxiety and depression that she couldn't understand. My parents are wonderful, she told me during our first session. They've given me everything, supported my education, always been there for me. I don't know why I feel so empty all the time. Tell me about wonderful, I said gently. What does that look like in your family? As Amanda described her relationship with her parents, familiar patterns emerged. The high expectations, the conditional approval, the way her achievements were celebrated but her struggles were treated as character flaws to be corrected. They just want the best for me, Amanda said when I gently pointed out some of these dynamics. Isn't that what good parents do? Good parents want their children to be happy and healthy, I said carefully. But sometimes what looks like caring can actually be controlling. Sometimes parents get so focused on their child being successful or perfect that they forget to love the child they actually have. Amanda was quiet for a long time. Are you saying my parents don't love me? I'm saying that maybe the love you received came with conditions that made it hard for you to know who you are underneath all the expectations. It took months of careful work for Amanda to begin recognizing the patterns that had shaped her, but watching her slowly reclaim her authentic self, seeing her learn to trust her own perceptions and set boundaries with people she loved, was incredibly healing for me too. I feel like I'm meeting myself for the first time, she told me during one session, like I've been performing my whole life, and I'm finally allowed to stop. I knew exactly what she meant. Building something new by my third year in the program, I had found my niche working with adult children of emotionally abusive families. I specialized in helping people recognize covert abuse, develop healthy boundaries, and rebuild their sense of self after years of conditioning. Marcus and I had also found our rhythm as a couple. We'd learn to support each other's growth without trying to fix each other's wounds, to create interdependence without enmeshment, to love fiercely while still maintaining our individual identities. "I want to ask you something," he said one evening as we walked along the shores of Puget Sound, watching the sunset paint the water gold and pink. My heart skipped, wondering if this was leading where I thought it might be. "I've been thinking about the future," he continued, "about the life we're building together, the work we're both doing, the family we've created with our friends and chosen siblings." "Yeah." He stopped walking and turned to face me. "I want to build something with you that's completely different from what either of us grew up with. I want to create a partnership based on mutual respect and support and the freedom to be ourselves. I want to love you in a way that makes you more yourself, not less." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and I felt tears start to flow before he even opened it. "Maya Chen, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me that breaks all the toxic patterns we inherited and creates something beautiful and healthy and free?" Through my tears, I could only nod. But as he slipped the ring onto my finger, a simple band with a small, perfect stone, I found my voice. "Yes," I said. "Yes, I want to build something beautiful with you. Something that honors who we really are instead of who we were supposed to be." As we held each other on that beach, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The scared, people-pleasing girl who'd left home 4 years ago would barely recognize the woman I'd become. I had found my voice, my calling, my people, my love. But most importantly, I had found myself. And for the first time in my life, I knew with absolute certainty that the person I'd found was worth loving exactly as she was. The work that heals, my dissertation research focused on resilience factors in adult children of emotionally abusive families. What helped some people break free while others remained trapped in toxic dynamics. Through interviews with dozens of survivors, I identified key factors: therapeutic support, healthy relationships that provided contrast to family dysfunction, the ability to trust their own perceptions, and perhaps most importantly, permission to prioritize their own well-being over family expectations. "Your research is important," Dr. Coleman told me as I neared completion of my degree. "You're giving voice to a type of abuse that's often invisible, helping people understand that emotional manipulation can be just as damaging as physical violence." "It feels personal," I admitted, "like I'm not just studying these dynamics. I'm helping people escape them. The best research often is personal. Your lived experience gives you insight that purely academic researchers might miss." She was right. When I presented my research at conferences, the rooms were packed with therapists who recognized their clients' stories in my findings, and with people who recognized their own stories. After one presentation, a woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "I've been trying to explain my childhood to therapists for years, and they always focused on the obvious stuff. Divorce, financial stress, things like that. No one understood that the real damage came from the constant criticism disguised as love, the way I was never allowed to be anything but grateful." "You deserved better," I told her, and meant it with every fiber of my being. As I finished my degree and prepared to begin my career as a licensed psychologist, I felt a deep sense of purpose I'd never experienced before. I wasn't just healing from my own wounds. I was using those wounds to help others find their path to freedom. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind. "Choose better, sweet girl. Choose yourself. Choose freedom. Choose the love that sets you free." I had chosen better, and now I was helping others do the same. Dr. Maya Washington, I'd taken Marcus's name, not to lose myself in him, but to symbolically shed the identity my parents had constructed, had become everything I'd never dared to dream I could be. My practice specialized in helping people break free from toxic family systems, and my book, The Invisible Cage, Healing from Emotional Abuse in the Family, had just been published to surprising acclaim. But success hadn't erased the wound at the center of my story. I still carried the grief of not having parents who could love me as I was, and they still carried the bewilderment of having a daughter who'd chosen herself over their version of love. The phone call had come 3 months earlier, from my father of all people. "Maya?" His voice sounded older, more fragile than I remembered. "I know you may not want to hear from us, but your mother. She's been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. The doctor says she has maybe 5 good years left." The news hit me like a physical blow. Whatever complicated feelings I had about my mother, the thought of her losing herself piece by piece was devastating. "I'm sorry to hear that, Dad," I managed. "She's been asking about you. Not in the way she used to, not with anger or hurt feelings. She just misses you. And I know this is a lot to ask, but would you consider visiting? Before she's not herself anymore. I'd spent 3 months in intensive therapy processing this request. Dr. Torres helped me explore what I hoped to gain from seeing them, what I feared, and most importantly, what boundaries I'd need to have in place. I can't promise reconciliation, I'd told my father when I finally called back. But I'm willing to have one honest conversation, with some conditions. The conditions for connection: they'd flown to Seattle rather than asking me to come home. A small but significant gesture that acknowledged I was an adult with my own life. We met at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant near my office where I felt safe and in control. I almost didn't recognize them. My father had aged considerably, his hair completely gray, his shoulders bent with what looked like more than just the passage of time. My mother looked smaller somehow, more fragile, though her eyes still held that familiar intensity. "Maya," she said softly when she saw me, and I heard something in her voice I'd never heard before: uncertainty. We sat across from each other at a corner table, the weight of 7 years between us. "Thank you for agreeing to see us," my father began. "We know we don't deserve it." It was the first time either of them had acknowledged that they might not deserve something from me. "I'm here because Dr. Torres, my therapist, helped me understand that I might regret not having this conversation while Mom is still herself. But I need you to understand that this isn't about resuming our old relationship. That relationship was harmful to me." My mother flinched as if I'd struck her. "Maya, sweetheart, we only ever wanted what was best for you." "I know you believed that," I said gently. "But good intentions don't erase harmful impact. The way you loved me, with conditions and criticism and constant pressure to be perfect, it nearly destroyed my ability to love myself." My father cleared his throat. "We went to therapy, like you suggested in that letter you never sent." I looked at him in surprise. "What letter?" "The one you wrote but didn't mail. We found it when we cleaned out your room. Jessica's mother gave us your old address, and we went there looking for you." The letter I'd written and decided not to send 3 years earlier. They'd read it. "Dr. Brennan, our therapist, she helped us understand some things about how we raised you," my mother continued, her voice shaking slightly. "About how our own childhoods affected the way we parented. About how what we thought was love might have felt like control to you." I felt something crack open in my chest, not the old wound but something else. Hope maybe. Or just the smallest possibility of healing. "What did you understand?" I asked quietly. My father's eyes filled with tears. "That we were so afraid of you making mistakes, so worried about you not being successful, that we never let you just be a child, be yourself. We turned love into a performance, and we made you perform for 21 years. And that when you finally stopped performing," my mother added, "we punished you for it instead of asking why you needed to stop." I stared at them, hardly believing what I was hearing. These were the words I'd needed for so long. Not just, "we're sorry," but actual understanding of what they'd done and why it had been harmful. "I spent my whole childhood trying to earn love that should have been unconditional," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I became so good at being who you wanted me to be that I forgot who I actually was." "We know," my mother said, and she was crying now. "Dr. Brennan helped us see that. She said we created a family system where you were the designated patient, the one whose problems kept us from looking at our own issues." The clinical language surprised me. They'd clearly done real work in therapy. "Do you understand why I had to leave?" I asked. "Yes," my father said immediately. "You had to save yourself from us. From the damage we were doing without meaning to. The healing that happened." We talked for 3 hours that day. Not about reconciliation or rebuilding our relationship, but about truth. They shared stories from their own childhoods that helped me understand the sources of their dysfunction. My mother's mother had been a perfectionist who showed love through criticism. My father's father had been emotionally absent, teaching him that providing material support was the same thing as love. I became the kind of mother I swore I'd never become. My mother admitted. "I criticized you the way my mother criticized me, thinking I was helping you be better. I never realized I was just passing down the same wounds. And I stood by and let it happen," my father added, "because I thought providing for you financially was enough. I didn't know how to be emotionally present." They told me about the therapy they'd been doing. Not just individual work, but grief counseling to mourn the relationship they'd lost with me, and family systems therapy to understand how their marriage had contributed to the dysfunction. "Dr. Brennan asked us what we wanted from you," my father said near the end of our conversation, "and we realized we wanted you to be happy and healthy in yourself, not grateful or perfect or anything else. Just yourself. The person you are now, my mother added, looking at me with something I'd never seen in her eyes before, genuine admiration. The woman who built a life and career around helping people heal from the kinds of wounds we gave you. We're so proud of who you've become, Maya. Not proud of your achievements. Proud of your courage. I cried then, finally letting myself grieve not just for the childhood I'd lost, but for the parents I'd never had, and might finally be getting to know. The boundary that saved everything. I want you to know. I said as our conversation wound down, that I forgive you, not because what happened wasn't harmful, but because I can see that you've done the work to understand and change. But forgiveness doesn't automatically mean reconciliation. My parents nodded, and I could see they'd prepared for this possibility. I need to see sustained change over time before I can consider rebuilding a relationship with you. And that relationship, if it happens, will have to be different from what we had before. I won't go back to being the grateful daughter who performs for your approval. We understand, my mother said. And we don't expect you to trust us just because we've had some therapy and said the right words today. We need to prove that we can love you without conditions. What would that look like? I asked. Respecting your boundaries, my father said immediately. Not trying to guilt you into more contact than you're comfortable with, celebrating your successes without taking credit for them. Supporting your choices even when they're not what we would choose. And if we slip back into old patterns, my mother added, accepting it when you call us on it instead of getting defensive. These were the words of people who'd done real work, who understood that change was an ongoing process, not a one-time conversation. I'd be willing to start with phone calls, I said carefully. Once a month, maybe. And if that goes well over time, we could consider visits. They agreed immediately, and I could see the relief in their faces. Not because they were getting everything they wanted, but because they were getting a chance to show they could love me differently. The life worth living. As I walked back to my office after that lunch, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 7 years ago, I'd been a broken young woman who believed she was the problem in her perfect family. Now I was a wife, a healer, a woman who'd learned to trust her own perceptions and love herself enough to demand better. Marcus was waiting for me when I got home, along with our chosen family. Jessica had moved to Seattle the year before. Sarah was visiting from Chicago, and Kevin and his partner were there for our monthly dinner tradition. How did it go? Marcus asked, studying my face. Better than I expected, I said honestly. They've actually done work, real work. I don't know if we'll ever have a normal relationship, but for the first time, I think we might have an honest one. And how do you feel about that? It was such a Marcus question. Not asking what I thought or what it meant, but what I felt. Hopeful, I said, surprising myself. Sad for all the years we lost, but hopeful that maybe it's not too late to build something real. That evening, as we sat around our dinner table with the family we'd chosen and built together, I felt a deep sense of completion, not because my story with my parents had ended perfectly. It hadn't, but because I'd become the woman my grandmother had hoped I could be. I'd chosen better. I'd chosen myself. I'd chosen freedom. And most importantly, I'd chosen to break the cycle. The legacy continues. The phone rang in my office the next week. A new client referred by someone who'd read my book. Dr. Washington. My name is Sarah Chen, no relation, I think. I'm 25, and I just realized that my family, well, I think they might be like the families you write about. Everything looks perfect from the outside, but I feel like I'm suffocating. I don't even know who I am underneath all their expectations. I understand, I said, feeling that familiar flutter of recognition and purpose. That takes a lot of courage to recognize. Tell me, what made you realize something might be wrong? Your book, she said simply. It was like reading my own story, and I thought, if Dr. Washington could break free and become who she really is, maybe I can too. As I scheduled her first appointment, I thought about the ripple effects of healing. Every person who breaks free from toxic patterns doesn't just save themselves. They save their future children, their future relationships, the families they'll choose to build or choose not to build. They break the cycle. Sarah, I said before we hung up, I want you to know something. You're not the problem in your family. You never were. And the fact that you're seeking help doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're brave. I heard her intake of breath, then a whispered, thank you. After I hung up, I sat in my office looking out at the Seattle skyline, thinking about the woman I'd become and the work I was called to do. I thought about my grandmother's journal, now framed on my desk, and the words that had set me free. You are not responsible for healing your parents' wounds by sacrificing your own wholeness. I thought about the monthly phone calls with my parents, which had been going well for 6 months now. They were learning to ask about my happiness instead of my achievements, to share their own vulnerabilities instead of managing mine, to love me without trying to improve me. It wasn't the family reunion I dreamed of as a child, but it was something better. It was honest. And sometimes, honesty is the closest thing to love that wounded families can achieve. I thought about Marcus, waiting at home with dinner and questions about my day, and the kind of steady, unconditional love I'd once thought was impossible. But mostly, I thought about all the Sarah Chens out there. The people still trapped in invisible cages, still believing they're the problem, still performing for love that will never satisfy because it was never really love at all. Tomorrow I'd help another person find their key to freedom. And the day after that, another, and another. Because that's what wounded healers do. We take the worst things that happen to us and transform them into the best things we can offer the world. We refuse to break. And we teach others that they don't have to break either. Epilogue: the letter I never sent. But finally cooled. Dear little Maya, I know you can't hear me yet. You're still learning to perform, still believing that love means becoming someone else, still carrying wounds you think are normal. But someday, when you're ready, you'll remember that you were never the problem. You'll learn that the voice inside you that whispers, "Something's wrong here," isn't the voice of ingratitude. It's the voice of your own wisdom, trying to save you. You'll discover that real love doesn't require you to shrink, that healthy relationships don't need you to apologize for existing, that families can disagree without anyone being difficult or disrespectful. You'll learn that you're allowed to trust your own perceptions, even when everyone else says you're wrong. Especially then, you'll find people who love your big feelings, your deep thoughts, your stubborn insistence on being yourself. You'll build a family that celebrates your authenticity, instead of trying to sand down your rough edges. And someday, little one, you'll sit in an office with your own name on the door, helping other people find their way back to themselves, and you'll understand that every moment of pain was preparing you for this purpose. You'll refuse to break. And you'll teach others that they can refuse to break too. The journey will be long and hard and worth every step. Keep going, sweet girl. Your real life is waiting for you on the other side of all that fear. With love and pride, the woman you'll become. Maya Washington, Ph.D., continues her practice in Seattle, specializing in helping adult children of dysfunctional families. She maintains monthly contact with her parents, who continue their own therapeutic work. She and Marcus recently celebrated their 3rd wedding anniversary by planting a garden, something they both enjoy because it grows and changes and becomes more beautiful with time, attention, and patience. Her book, The Invisible KG, Healing from Emotional Abuse in the Family, has helped thousands of people recognize and escape covert family dysfunction. Her grandmother's journal remains on her desk, a daily reminder that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is refuse to pass down the patterns that wounded us. The cycle ends here.